Establishing the Business Case for Workplace Essential Skills Training, UPSKILL, a Pan-Canadian demonstration project, hosted by David Geramardi, SRDC's Research Director, and Adam Morrison, OTEC's Director of Project Development. My name is Amber Hawes, and I'm the Communications and Marketing Coordinator at Essential Skills Ontario. So just before we get started, I just want to give you a few instructions. At the right-hand side of your screen is your GoToWebinar dashboard. Currently, all attendees are muted, so we ask that if you have a question, either technical or about the webinar, that you just type it into your question pane. We will be pausing for questions throughout different parts of the webinar, so if you do have any questions at any point in time, please feel free to just type it in the question pane, and there will also be a Q&A period at the end of the webinar. Also, if you'd like to participate in the conversation on Twitter, you can follow us at ES_Ontario or using the hashtag ESOWeb. So I'll just give you a brief introduction of our presenters before we get started. So David is a research director with the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation and has over 15 years of experience in conducting social policy research and evaluation in Canada. This includes more than a decade of pioneering work with SRDC and the design, implementation, and evaluation of large-scale experimental demonstration projects. And for Adam, as OTEC's Director of Project Development, Adam leads OTEC's provincial labor market development initiatives by working with industry, government educators, and the not-for-profit sector to integrate and align resources and systems. Adam's commitment to developing projects that improve collaboration has led to his leadership of organizational research, capacity building, and sector-level strategy projects at OTEC. So before you guys get sick of hearing my voice, I'm going to pass it over to David to get started.
Thank you, Amber. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Big thanks to start to Essential Skills Ontario for hosting. Adam and I are going to be discussing the results of a fairly groundbreaking study called UPSKILL. I know some of you have heard about it. Some of you have been waiting anxiously to hear these results. We got a lot to cover, some very exciting stuff in here. Here's a brief overview. We'll do a brief introduction to the study and provide some background on the design and implementation. And as Amber said, rather than wait until the end for questions and discussion, we're going to open it up briefly after item 2. So feel free to ask questions about background, design, implementation. So then I'm going to present some of the results on the impacts on workers and firms of the Literacy Essential Skills Training Intervention, followed by the study of the return on investment. We'll then take a few more questions, and then we'll talk a little bit about some subgroup analysis, which has very important implications for the study, and sum it up with a concluding summary. So really quickly, what is UPSKILL? It's a Pan-Canadian demonstration project measuring the effects of LES training. It's large scale. We were in 8 provinces, 110 firms, nearly 1,500 workers. We're in the accommodation sector of tourism. It was funded by the federal government's Office of Literacy and Essential Skills. Big thanks to them for doing this. This was a very groundbreaking initiative and fairly large scale. It started back in 2010. Our key partners in this initiative were, Adam is joining me from Ontario Tourism Education Corporation, our leading partner in Ontario, along with their colleagues at the Canadian Tourism Human Resource Council. We also had Douglas College, the training group at Douglas College on board, and SkillPlan to help with the design, along with 25 other trainers in 8 provinces across the country. What are the goals of the study? What are the objectives? Basically, the goal was to measure the effects of literacy and essential skills training with the most rigorous methods in an effort to establish this business case for LES training by measuring its return. Why is this important? Many of you are very familiar with this context, so I'm going to be brief, but I will reiterate a few key points. Everyone knows that low literacy is an issue. It has been persistent. Back in 2003, about 40% of working-age Canadians had less than level 3, the requirements for most jobs. In 2013, this is persistent, somewhere at 49%. At the same time, about 75% of those, some studies suggest upwards of 80% of those who are currently working have low literacy. So the workplace is a vital channel for literacy training. However, evidence suggests that less than 1 in 20 firms, basically 5% of firms from some of the work we've done, suggest that firms are making these investments. Why? if the need is as large as the numbers suggest, why would firms not be making these kinds of investments? Even when there's significant anecdotal evidence that suggests it works. Because there has not been a compelling business case. While there's various reasons, fundamentally they all have to do with this question of risk and return, and whether or not firms know that there is going to be a positive return for them. So fundamentally, that's what this study was aiming to do, to provide that business case. It is more than the number. We're not just looking for that number. We're trying to understand the conditions in which LES training can be more successful and you can maximize. Because there may be environments where it doesn't make sense. And we're going to talk a lot about that at the end of the presentation.
David, sorry, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Can I get you to speak up a little bit? I've got a couple of people here that are having a hard time hearing you. They're saying there's quite a bit of static in the background.
Okay, let me bring this mic. Is this any better?
A little bit.
Okay. Let me know if this isn't any better, and I'll have to take more serious measures here. So let me give you just a few more quick details about the recruitment of participants and what we actually trained on. So we, again, are in the accommodation sector in the tourism industry. 110 firms joined our study. This was largely hotels. 104 of them underwent organizational needs assessments. 88 firms with clear training needs decided to continue in the study. And only one firm, after we had actually done those organizational needs assessments and had recruited workers, only one firm withdrew from the study. The levels of satisfaction with the training were exceptionally high. I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more when we get to the impacts. But that was a really good early sign that very few firms were actually withdrawing after they realized that this was actually going to be done. 20 of those, there's the regional distribution there, 20 of those firms were recruited in Ontario, which represented about 20% of our sample. Nearly 1,500 workers joined the study from 88 of the participating firms, about 300 workers from those 20 firms in Ontario. 4 frontline occupational groups were represented, and all of these groups had significant essential skills needs throughout a range of essential skills. We're not just talking about document use and numeracy in this study. There are significant gaps, as you will soon see, in oral communications, thinking skills, and working with others. 4 occupational groups are listed there, and they kind of span the range of skill levels from more complex positions, administrative positions like front desk, all the way to custodial positions such as housekeeping. We have other service positions, food and beverage servers, bartenders, line cooks, and kitchen assistants.
David, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
We're having a really hard time hearing you on this end. Is there another phone that you could possibly call from, or possibly call back in quickly?
Okay, bear with me for 1 second, sorry. Adam, go ahead there. Take it away.
Okay. While you're looking to your microphone, just to add to David's comments, what was interesting, just from the outset, working with the hotels, we found that they were joining the project for very different reasons. We tried to have a fairly representative sample, small market hotels, as well as large corporate chains. We had hotels from Windsor, Niagara, Toronto, Ottawa, several Northern Ontario markets. And one of the ways that they varied from hotel to hotel was in that some were interested in, well, an opportunity for free training. Just as simple as that, a great way to get some of their team members trained up. Whereas others were actually more interested in the organizational needs assessment itself. It's a very high-valued service to have consultants come and conduct this type of work and do that kind of 360-degree feedback with management and employees. So it was interesting, and we had to consider those motivations when we were creating the control group and the training group, which David will get into a little bit later. Now, do we have David?
I think the problem is something that's happening in the background, and if this isn't any better, I can try to dial in Amber. Is this any better?
unfortunately.
No?
Oh, there's still quite a bit of background noise, unfortunately.
So is there a way to dial in for this? Via phone?
Keep talking right now?
Is there any way to dial in via phone?
Actually, this seems to be okay. Whatever you're doing, I'm not sure if you're just to the mic. This seems to be okay.
Okay, well.
So, you know what, let's just keep going with this, and if we're having a hard time, then I'll let you know how to dial back in. I apologize, everybody.
Yeah, me as well. I'm sorry.
No, technology is a blessing, but also a curse at the same time. So we'll just continue on for now, because you are sounding much clearer. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I was going to say a few brief things about the training model. Here's what the traditional model looks like. So firms are engaged, participants are recruited, the needs analysis is conducted, and then you customize a curriculum based on those needs, and then you deliver training. Our model was no different. We received up to 40 hours of training. It was blended delivery, group, one-on-one, self-paced. However, one very unique thing that UPSKILL brought here, this certainly isn't groundbreaking. There are several organizations that do this kind of thing. We basically levered a sector-based approach to the traditional model, where we conducted a sector-level engagement and looked at performance gaps and training needs of a series of exemplar firms so that we could understand them at a higher level and then design a core curriculum that would then be taken into each of the individual firms and then customized. And what this basically did, it did a number of things which we will talk about, but the original reason for doing it was in a short intervention, to help ensure that there was some consistency in the delivery. So rather than having to hobble together, some different tools for that curriculum, we provided them the core curriculum targeted to a series of pre-established, based on these sector needs, gaps. The customization then was easier to accomplish. It was easier for instructors in this model to achieve alignment, really, is one of the key benefits. Another benefit, which we'll talk about briefly, was in terms of the communication strategy and how it was easier to engage these individual firms once we had these tools and this curricula in place. Before we get to that, though, just a couple of noteworthy features about the model that I wanted to emphasize. I obviously can't go into complete details. We want to focus on the results, but I wanted to emphasize a few critical things for you. In terms of the evaluation design, we are utilizing a randomized control trial, and this is one of the things that make it very groundbreaking. So this is similar to clinical trials, where half of the firms and workers are randomly assigned to receive the training, and then the other half is assigned to a control group. They're all assessed before and afterwards, and we track these two groups over time, and any differences we see between the two groups can be reliably attributed to the training. In any other evaluation, you can't always say that. So if you just look at before and after change, you can't know for sure whether that before and after change is attributed to the intervention, because change happens for so many reasons. There's various things that can cause change, particularly in a dynamic workplace environment. Things that are happening in workers' lives, other conditions, market-related conditions, or things that are happening in the firm. So in order to really know what that effective training is, we need to compare what that before and after the training effect is to what it would have been if they hadn't actually participated. And the best way to do that is with a randomized control trial. In addition to that methodology, another great thing about this was the evaluation framework. We had a very comprehensive set of measures that we look at, not just what the skills and the performance that we're interested in. We look at characteristics of the learners, the structure of the firms, the whole process by which training is done to really help us understand what is producing those gains. And a very particular part of this evaluation framework I'm going to highlight here that is unique is this set of performance metrics that we were able to utilize. And I'm going to show you what those look like. And the reason they were so powerful is they're kind of like the missing link between essential skills measures and business outcome measures, and they help us monetize, as you will soon see, a lot of these impacts so that we can estimate what those returns actually are. So what am I referring to in terms of this performance framework? A lot of studies do look at business needs. So these are 6 core business needs for this sector that grew out of this sector needs analysis. They deal with enhancing customer relations and maintaining service. These are the drivers of revenues, customer satisfaction and revenues, You then have increasing productivity, which is a key one, increasing in sales more directly through improvements in upselling abilities, and then improvements in health and safety and retention and absenteeism around human resources. So this isn't that groundbreaking. A lot of studies actually do these through either data or through employer surveys. At the same time, a lot of studies also look at the essential skills needs, and we certainly did. We didn't just look at the core literacy skills either in terms of document use, prose, and numeracy. We looked at working with others, continuous learning, and in particular, oral communication and thinking skills, because they're fundamentally important to these business needs around revenue generation. But what's missing in the middle? You know, it might be enough with a randomized controlled trial to look at essential skills, how they change, and then looking at business needs. But we wanted to go a step further and really understand what is in between these, and that is the performance gaps. What is it in behavior terms that employees are not doing that if you were to address those gaps, they would drive business returns? And what's really important about these is we base these measures on industry standards through objective performance measurement known as the Merit certification program. And this is one of the other powerful reasons we went with this sector, is we had a lot of infrastructure to build this evaluation on top of. And the reason this is so important is not only is it measured objectively, so I mean these aren't self-assessed, these are measured by observers, certified observers who come into both before and after training into the hotels, and they observe work. And the reason this is so vital is because it helps us establish a credible link to the business outcomes. Because there's a pretty clear relationship, and a well-studied, in many cases, a well-studied relationship between performance and business outcomes. And here's just a few examples. Obviously, if employees are communicating better, they have more professionalism, they can solve problems and complaints of guests, that's going to drive service quality and guest satisfaction. These have very predictable relationships with customer loyalty and retention, how often they return to the hotel and to the brand, how often they recommend the hotel. And these ultimately drive occupancy rates, room revenue, and ancillary spending at the hotel. Similarly, performance in productivity has the same relationship. So the more organized and efficient and fewer errors they make in their tasks on a micro level, they drive efficiency metrics at a departmental level and error rates at a departmental level. And some really particularly important ones that we see in this study are labor cost savings in terms of staff time and supervisors' time, as you will see.
David,
Yeah, go ahead.
just from an engagement point of view, this was critical, how we were starting from the business needs first, because this industry, hospitality, we didn't come across a great deal of knowledge or exposure to essential skills, assessments and training amongst the network of hotels. So we, by relating it all to their business needs and then showing them the connections, we really had to walk them through, logic, probably for the first time for most of them. So the way we had this laid out was very, very good for us.
Yeah. We were going to open it up for questions at this point. I'm just going to highlight 2 points, and this is sort of elaborating on what Adam just said. Rather than wait till the end and talk about the implications, there are a couple of critical implications with respect to the design of workplace essential skills training, and that is with respect to this performance framework. When you embed literacy and essential skills in this occupational terms, in task terms, and a business needs framework, that really helps the employer understand, and it helps the practitioners communicate what essential skills training can do. And in fact, as you've alluded to many times, Adam, they don't speak the language of essential skills training at all. So this is what's critical about it. You're basically putting the essential skills in a language that they understand. Now, I think most people have heard about embedding. This has certainly been a growing coverage over the last couple of years, but primarily the thing that's focused on, and that is in terms of how you're able to achieve alignment and how it leads to better training outcomes, and that's certainly the case. But one related benefit is in terms of encouraging employer investments in this approach, because it makes it so much easier to communicate effectively with them. And the second point just flows from this, is that this sector approach that we took is a very effective and efficient way in order for you to prepare this performance framework, to design the core curriculum, and also to build the partnerships to actually make this happen. The scale that we were doing this on, it wouldn't have been able to happen this way if we didn't focus on a sector-based approach. Particularly on the research side of it, we wouldn't have been able to do it, but even in terms of getting the numbers and getting the commitment from these employers, like the level of satisfaction we had and the level of commitment and the low rates of withdrawal are a testament to how this curriculum and how this model actually looked. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that any further, Adam or Amber, if there's any burning questions at this point about the design, about what we implemented. We can open it up now.
Okay, I just have one question so far. So with the randomized control trial, were there workers within one firm that were both in the training and control groups, or were the control groups assigned to one company that in effect would not have had any worker trained at all?
Yeah, wonderful question. Firms were randomly assigned, so clusters of workers in firms are randomly assigned. There's no one within a firm that is in the control group, and so they're not working alongside others who got training. So program group firms are assigned and control group firms are assigned.
Okay, perfect. That was the only question that I have so far. I think the beginning audio issue may have thrown people off a little bit. So if you just want to continue, and then if any questions come up between now and the next, oh, sorry, and now there's one more question.
Okay.
Participants paid during training times?
Yes, yes, they were. In fact, that's one of the great things about the study that we actually had. We had half of the release time for employers actually covered. So yes, some participants were receiving payments throughout, but we were able to reimburse the employers for half of that time. So if they received on average 26 hours, we would have the employee would have been paid for them, and we would have reimbursed the employer for half of that time.
Okay, perfect. So I don't have any other questions right now, so if you just want to continue, and then if there are other burning questions that I see come up before the next
Okay.
pause, then I'll come in and kindly interrupt you.
Okay. Adam, did you want to say anything?
Just one other point about the control group. So I mentioned earlier that the motivations of the hotel varied. So we had a bit of a challenge here in that if training was the biggest reason that they wanted to be involved in the project, if they were selected for the control group, their participants, their employees, wouldn't be receiving training. And so how do we keep them engaged in the project over a 18-month period where their chief reason for being a part of it, they're not going to have that benefit. So that's why it was really important to get them engaged in the model itself and in the ultimate research and its objectives. So that was interesting, and we didn't lose too many hotels, so it appeared to work.
No, you did a fabulous job of actually keeping control group in here. Anytime we do this kind of study, you do have significant attrition, but we kept it to a point where we can actually have a study, and we do have a study. And on that point, let's get to the questions that you've been waiting for some time. The answers. Essential skills training. Did upskill training produce measurable impacts on literacy and essential skills? This is kind of like the duh question, right? But there has been some debate on this question, Some people feel it happens right away. Others think it needs time to actually develop in terms of literacy practice. So the answer, both. It happens right away, 11 points, 18 points in terms of longer-term gains. So if you look at those only with less than 6 months after enrollment, they're getting 12 points gains compared to the control group. So this is what you're seeing here. This is program group change before and after. This is control group change without the actual intervention. And this is the difference. So this is the incremental effect that is caused by the actual training. So this first post-training assessment happens somewhere between 1 and 9 months, and the average impact is 11 points. The longer-term assessment, which is somewhere between 6 and 9 months after that, is upwards of 18 points. A better way to actually isolate this short versus longer-term effect is to only look at those who had assessments less than 6 months after enrollment, and then those who had it longer than 12 months. And this is where you can really see the difference. Immediate impacts of essential skills training are possible. You're getting about a quarter of a level here. And then those who had longer-term assessments, it's even larger, 23-point impact. which is basically about half a level, or what we would have anticipated. And this is a very important finding because I think it does provide some insight to this debate that was going on about whether it happens right away or it requires literacy practice over time. And no one's wrong. Both of them are right. You can get gains quickly, and they will increase over time. Another important way to look at this, though, rather than just average scores, is the distribution. And this is really important from a policy perspective. And what we're seeing is the percentage of participating workers that are at level 3 has actually gone up compared to where they would have been without training. There are 22% more at level 3. So what this means for an employer, for the average employer who was participating in upskill who had 15 participants, that translates into additional 3 to 4 employees who were at the literacy levels for their required job. And this is just a figure which shows it. This shows the impact, the shift in the distribution, the percentage that are at each levels because of this essential skills training. You're seeing those in the low ends of the distribution and upper ends of level 1, as well as those in upper level 2, are getting shifted up this distribution to the extent that 22% more are now functioning at level 3 after that intervention, which is a really nice result from a policy perspective. And the results are similar when you look at the 12-month result. You're basically shifting, somewhere between 3 and 4 employees out of 15 into the level 3, the requirements for their job over the longer run, which is an important result. The next important question beyond essential skills is, does it lead to measurable impacts on job performance? And this is ultimately that middle section, what employers are really interested in. So how we do this is based on those standards, merit assessments. Again, they're observational, taken on-site before and afterwards. And the way we've structured these results, just so that you know, I'll walk you through what this actually means, but they're very high standards. This isn't like high school where you get 50% to pass. You actually require 85% to pass. And there's a little bit more subtlety to that, so we broke it up into like 4 categories. If you're really surpassing the performance standard for that job, you're at 95 to 100. If you're just meeting the standards, you're at 85 to 95. If you're failing to meet the standards, but you're approaching, so you're in that 65 to 85, we thought it was important to kind of remove that out, separate that out so we could see the difference between them and those who are very far below the standard. So if you're getting less than 65% on a particular performance set in that assessment, you're doing very badly in your job. These assessments cover, there's a couple of ways to look at them. We'll look at one which brings them all together, and that's just the percentage that pass the certification for their job. But we can actually split these results up, and we can look at the different components, and those refer back to the business needs that we were talking about around guest relations, so how individuals are engaging with customers, productivity, health and safety related issues. So on the first one, we were looking at customer relations. Participating workers were 20 percentage points more likely to meet the industry standards for customer relations. So for the average firm with 15 participants, this meant 3 more now were functioning at high standards on their job. And keep in mind, this is coming from an intervention of less than 40 hours. The average firm was getting in the neighborhood of, in fact, the average worker was getting in the neighborhood of 20 hours, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The business demands in a workplace are such that it's very hard to get more than 20 to 25 hours of training. And this modest level of intervention is producing significant skill gains and now significant performance improvement. So what does this actually look like? This is confusing at first glance, but I'll walk you through it because it's really interesting. Look at the control group first on this side. This is the percentage change in each of those categories before and after training. So this one on the far left here are the percentage that are failing very badly. They're getting less than 65% on this performance set. This is the ones that are approaching but still failing. These top 2 categories are passing the standard. This is the group that is only meeting it, so they're getting between 85 and 95, and this is the percentage change in those that are surpassing. So what this is telling us, and this is the power of having the control group, is that naturally if you don't do any training, essential skills training, what's going to happen is that some individuals are going to get worse. So they're actually, those who are already failing are getting worse, a small percentage, and some that are already passing are getting better. But look what's happening in the program group after training. No one is actually getting worse. In fact, some who are at the very low ends of the distribution failing badly, as well as those who are still failing but approaching, are getting shifted up the distribution. And now double the percentage that were surpassing in the control group are now surpassing in the program group. This is a very powerful result because it's basically demonstrating that training is changing the structure of work here, and those who are most in need are actually the ones being shifted up the distribution. This is another component of guest relations, which shows you a very similar pattern, just more striking. Those who are effectively resolving customer problems and resolving complaints, you see a similar pattern. Those who are already failing in the control group are now getting worse, and those who were passing are getting better. This is not what you see in the program group. Those who are failing very badly are now surpassing the standard. This is so that was on guest relations in terms of things that drive revenue, and you can see a pattern here. We're building something. So we see 3 to 4 participants getting skill gains. We see, another 3 participants who are performing better in their job from a customer relations perspective. Now, in terms of productivity, and I'll show you what we mean by productivity at a worker level. It deals with how they work in teams, how organized they are in their job, how well they manage their time. Participating workers in the LES training were 15 percentage points more likely to surpass the standard in productivity compared to the control group. And for the average firm who had about 15 participants, this is 2 more employees now who are performing at high standards. I won't go through all of these different, each of these performance areas are made up of a dozen individual indicators. This is a group of indicators around how effectively they work in teams. And the reason I highlighted this one is because it's really interesting in terms of the control group. And what this is telling us is that the ability to work in teams, both within a department and across departments, it's a very static set of behaviors for workers. They will not change without training or without some intervention over time. But look what happens through essential skills training. You're basically shifting those who are, again, at the low ends of the distribution, up the distribution, as well as a few who were failing but approaching and some who were already meeting the standard. But this is significant in that you're taking, these individuals who are failing this badly on a measure related to working effectively in teams, they're significant drawdown on productivity for these firms, both within departments and across departments. And now after training, they're getting shifted up and surpassing the standard. So the last one I'm going to highlight in terms of performance is just the overall results. When you put all these together, this is the performance component of certification. This is a really striking result, not only because it means that firms are getting higher performing workers, but it's also very meaningful for employees because the ability to pass this certification can reinforce other training goals that they may have, their career paths and their future employment prospects. So this is what we're actually seeing. This one's a very clear and nice impact. When you look at the control group, this is overall the percentage that are passing industry certification, the performance component before training and after training. And as you see, there's very little change, about 60%, 61 before, 60 after. But look at the control group. It goes from 60, the same range, up to 71% after. So the difference here is 12 percentage points more are now able to pass the overall certification for their job, not because of performance training, but because of essential skills training, which is a very striking and powerful result. The related question from this, so I'll go through this one quickly, but a really nice result. Does LES training then lead to improvements in employment rates and job retention? The answer is yes. LES training increased job retention by 8 percentage points, 6 percentage points of which is caused by an increase in employment rates. And this is what I mean. So in the control group, this lower bar, only 83% of those who were working for that employer at baseline are still working for them approximately 12 months later. Some of them are working with a different employer here. Many of them have had an unemployment spell. Some have left, a small percentage have left the labor force. But look at what's happening in the program group. 91% of those who received essential skills training are now still with that employer. A smaller percentage of them are unemployed. So it's this versus that. And where you can see that, sorry, that was not this is working for a different employer. This is the impact on employment, these two. And an easier way to see that is when we look at this. So this is working with the same employer, 8.5 percentage point impact, 5.9 percentage points of which is caused by unemployment. So 6% of the control group had an unemployment spell in that year who in the program group, they did not. And this has translated into approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500 in additional earnings for participants in the program group, as you'll see when we talk about the cost benefit. And this was just to show that this is not some transient set of weeks that we're unemployed for. These jobs, this incremental employment, is full-time work, 40 weeks or more. So let me go through the business outcomes quickly. There's probably a few questions there, but let me get through these ones, and then we'll open it up briefly for questions. Adam, feel free to pipe in at any point if you want. So in terms of the impacts on firms, obviously this is a very interesting questions for employers and for this long-term interest of encouraging essential skills training in the workplace. Do these gains in skills and job performance that we have seen lead to measurable effects for business outcomes? So what we're going to look at, these are very simple figures. I'll walk you through this one. We'll look at some intermediate business metrics before we look at revenues and costs. So these are the things that drive revenues. So remember that chart on the left-hand side and those things in the middle. So when you're improving someone's communication and you're improving their ability to provide high-quality service, naturally that's going to have an effect on guest satisfaction ratings. What this is doing, this shows us the control group. The percentage of the control group is in red that are reporting changes before and after in terms of the follow-up. In guest satisfaction ratings, the program group is in the blue. And this is a very large impact. So this is basically telling us over 60% of control group experience no change. Without training, though, a lot is going on. Various things happen within those firms that cause change. So some are reporting some small and medium-sized increases in satisfaction, but look at what's happening in the program group. Substantially larger increases in guest satisfaction in the neighborhood of between 1 and 3 percentage points. This is a medium-sized increase, as well as 3 points. This is on a standardized GSR, guest satisfaction rating, which is meaningful to our employers. About 15 percentage points more in the program group are having a large increase in guest satisfaction, which is ultimately going to drive revenue, as you will see. Another very important guest satisfaction related and revenue driver relates to service recovery. This is the number of guest complaints. And this is, in my 15 years, the largest impact that I've seen, in fact. You basically got 3/4 of the control group that are reporting no changes in guest complaints, but over 80% of program groups are reporting a reduction in the incidence of guest complaints. This is basically more than 1/3 are reporting medium-sized reductions, and nearly 1 in 5 are now reporting large reductions in guest satisfaction. So those improvements in service quality, the improvements in guest satisfaction ratings, and these reductions in guest complaints have very reliable relationships with revenue, and in fact that's what we're seeing. When we look at, now this is a more modest increase when you compare it to the previous ones, but it is statistically significant. When you look at the percentage of firms in the program group who receive training that are reporting increases in occupancy rates, we see nearly a 12 percentage point increase in those who have very large increases. So this is, again, meaningful to those in hospitality. Between 3 and 5 percentage point increase in occupancy rates are being reported, and that is statistically significant. And yeah, sorry.
Sorry, David. And this is the aggregated data in front of us, but I actually had conversations with general managers who told me that they felt business had turned around for them as a result of the training and these improved guest satisfaction surveys. I mean, they were getting more business, higher occupancy rates 6 months after.
And this one is just a remarkable one. I look at it, the service recovery. We have some of the implementation research and some of the qualitative evidence. People spoke quite eloquently about what this actually means and how tangible it is to the business to actually observe fewer guest complaints. I mean, and these are metrics that employers, certainly many of the medium-sized ones and definitely the larger ones that know where these metrics are at, not on a monthly basis. We're talking on a daily basis, and in some cases even in an hourly basis. So this is something that they pay very close attention to, are very familiar with. So what the occupancy rate also brings is increases in food and beverage spending and some ancillary spending that we've seen increases in. So I'm not going to go through all these costs. I bring them together when I talk about the return on investment study, but just some mention of the lower labor costs that we're seeing. This is coming out of two primary means: increased task efficiency of the actual workers themselves, and a big one, lower supervisory costs. So we're seeing decreases in error rates in the core job activities that come out of the things that we were talking about. But we're also seeing, in terms of their performance, but we're also seeing this decrease in the amount of time to complete these core tasks, depending on the job. So for front desks, that would be time to process check-ins and check-outs. For housekeeping room attendants, it's reductions in time to clean and prepare rooms. Food and beverage, it's time to seat and take customer service orders. So this task efficiency is an important driver of cost savings, as well as supervisory costs. So not only are we seeing an increase in a very large increase in supervisory confidence in the quality of their staff's work, but a reduction in the amount of time that they actually have to spend overseeing that work and correcting those errors. So this is freeing up significant time for them as well.
Now, occasionally, you'd be speaking with an employer who would feel that one of their departments is really strong, and maybe its front desk is really efficient and well-trained. But if you asked them, what happens when you change a process? That's where they could start to anticipate where any essential skills gaps would be.
Yeah.
They dealt with the fact that it takes a long, long time to get them performing very efficiently, and they're loath to change systems for that reason.
Yeah. The other point, we'll talk more about these when we talk about conclusions and implications, but another key driver of some of these is the fact that essential skills training, often what they're getting, compared to when you do technical training you can have very remarkable gains for firms, but usually they're very focused in a very particular area. The power of the essential skills training that we're seeing here is that it affects a breadth of areas. Because by their very nature they are transferable, even though you're training on one thing in one context, it can lead to improvements in another. And this is one of the key points around efficiency gains. You get those efficiency gains because it's essential skills training. Mm-hmm. So another one of the significant costs relates to the retention effect that I had shown. So we're seeing this increase in retention of 8.5 percentage points. This translated into a clear reduction in hiring costs for workers. And this was in the neighborhood of $4,400 per firm. And this is similar. There's been occupational HR studies in this sector that puts it at somewhere around $4,000 or $4,200. This is for hiring a frontline worker in terms of all in what the costs are to replace workers. So this is a significant foregone cost. So when I've been referring to these costs, $4,400, that sounds large, but what we need to do in order to really understand whether that is large or not is to put them on equal footing in terms of what is the per participant cost. So what does it cost to actually deliver this essential skills training, and what are these monetized benefits per participant, not per firm, but per participant per firm. How much are they actually getting out, and do they get out more than they otherwise put in? Before I do that, Amber, is there any burning questions on the impacts that have come up?
Yeah, I actually have quite a few questions here. So I've got a few shorter questions and a couple of longer ones. So what was the funding for the wage subsidy?
Sorry, what was the funding for the wage subsidy?
Yes.
It was basically half of their wage costs. So, the average wage was around $14 an hour. So if they spent if the firm on average spent 26 hours in training per their workers, we would reimburse, the government, OLIS, would reimburse half of that at their going wage.
Okay, perfect. At the initial stage, how did you get employer buy-in?
Great question, and something that we could hold, another webinar on, Adam. But that was something, I guess, that we were alluding to at the beginning. And what a couple of those key implications I think that we are drawing out of this is it is about speaking the language and the interests that employers speak. It is not about speaking about essential skills. And the one thing in this model that helps do that, and in future implementations of this kind of training, what you should strive to do is take essential skills training and put it within a context that makes sense both to employers and firms. That is, having a performance and a business needs framework. So those business needs around communicating with guests, around maintaining service excellence, around productivity, around health and safety. Talk about what it means to workers and firms to achieve those things, not about the gaps in document use or oral communication. That's a part of it, but you embed that in what makes sense to them. The other part of this that you feel free to elaborate on as well, Adam, is that having that performance framework is part of it. The other part of this is this, again, the sector-based approach made it easier for us to design that curriculum because we built on this existing infrastructure and we had the partnerships. So Adam and his colleagues in other provinces and the CTHRC, they have existing relationships with many employers, which made it so much easier for us.
So being able to sit down with them and show them the national occupational standards for the housekeeping department and show them how this is being adapted based on their business needs to shore up any skills gaps in the department. I mean, it's a pretty easy sell. And then you have to consider also that, well, especially in HR, they've been trying to make the argument to train their teams and come up with innovative new models for many, many years, and they have been asked as professionals so many times, what's in it for us? What's the ROI on this training? What's the ROI on that? So this is for them a big opportunity, maybe for some the first in their career, to actually achieve those metrics and get them in their hands so that they can make those arguments to their GMs, to their business owners.
There's one important thing that we're going to talk about in about 5 to 10 minutes, another key implication from this study that will elaborate on that answer even further. I think for the purposes of this implementation of Upskill, those were some of the key things. Having that performance framework, having that core curriculum that was designed in a way that would meet the business needs of firms, and having the appropriate partners that had these relationships, that was critical to getting it. But there's another piece to the puzzle that we have learned through this study that will really make employer buy-in easier to do. And I'm going to make you wait for 5 minutes before you hear that wonderful answer.
That's okay. I'm going to make you answer more questions in that time.
Okay.
How is the training customized?
So this is another one that we could likely hold a webinar on. But so first thing to emphasize again is compared to a traditional approach where, traditionally when you say customization, you're talking about a model where you've already had to hobble together, various tools, some of the stuff that SkillPlan produces, maybe some of the stuff that you have from industry, some of the stuff that OLIS publishes to customize a solution. We already had a very well customized solution for many of these firms based on this sector needs analysis. So it was already aligned. Further customization was done on the basis of two levels. One, the firm business needs. So we covered 6 core business areas. In many cases, firms didn't need all of that training. So in some cases, they just got a little bit more of one business area and a little bit less of another. So there was some customization to employer business needs. The other level is obviously customization to learner needs. So this is what many of you already know is very challenging about doing this work, is when you are working with a range of skill gaps, it's hard to do this, right? You have some who are low level 1, upper level 1, low level 2. They need more intensive training, certainly more focused training on some of these foundational skills than some who are at upper level 2. And there's going to be some customization in the approach as well, whereas some will need a little bit more one-on-one. So both in terms of the depth of need and the method, there was some customization. But I do emphasize, again, having this sector-based approach and this core model really minimized and made that exercise so much easier, and there was more consistency in the delivery.
We also gave the HR departments the opportunity to provide any systems or processes or documents that they wanted to have us embed into the curriculum as well. So it could be tailored right to the actual activities of the employees.
Okay, so I have quite a few questions here, so I'm just going to ask one more, and then I think I'll save the rest until the end so we can just actually get through the PowerPoint. Could you tell us a bit more about the assessment tools used?
Yeah, so in addition to some core surveys that we look at a whole range of individual characteristics and firm structural issues, there's 2 core elements to the quote-unquote assessments. One is essential skills assessment, so the traditional ones around literacy. We focused on document use and numeracy. This was done through the TOWS, the Test of Workplace Essential Skills. a modified version of it that we worked with Bow Valley College to actually develop that had more face validity for the actual accommodation sector. But just as importantly, we didn't want to just focus on those skills. We wanted to focus on, as we've alluded to throughout this performance section, on oral communication, on problem solving, on working with others. Those essential skills that don't traditionally have the same kind of measures, this sector has measures for them, and they are based in the performance assessments. These are, and Adam can say more about them, this is the Emerit industry certification process.
Perfect. So if you guys just want to continue on the PowerPoint, and then I'll ask the rest of the questions at the end, if that works.
Sure. Do you want to have a quick follow-up there, Adam?
No, just a third-party evaluator would come on site and conduct the performance evaluation. That's how it's structured. It's a system that's been in place for about 10 years.
Yep. Okay, so bringing it all together, what are the returns from investment in LES training? Now, when you see these charts, I'm going to walk you through. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. I'm going to focus on a couple of key results, but just to let you know what's going on here. Basically, what you're seeing is the perspective. So you have participants, you have firms, and then you have program delivery costs. You have the impacts that are driven for learners, so the participants in the study, the firms, the government budgets, and then the sum of all three of these is basically the overall result for society. And a couple of key points to mention. When you see these values in here, I'll walk you through what a few of them mean, but it's important to keep in mind the power of this approach. So this isn't like a traditional cost-benefit analysis where you're trying to estimate, what some of these benefits are, or what these costs are. These values in here, they come right out of the things that you were seeing for the last half hour. They come out of the randomized controlled trial. And as a result, they represent incremental benefits and costs as a result of this intervention, which is a very powerful approach. So when we combine the benefits with the costs, this net gain here represents the net over and above what would have happened if you didn't actually have this intervention. And then when we compare the size of those benefits with the costs, that's what we can come up with on the bottom here in terms of returns. So really quickly, let me just walk you through what you're actually seeing. So for participants, obviously they have employment and earnings gains. Over the period of the follow-up, we took a conservative approach to a lot of these measures, and we can definitively say in comparable terms to the timeline for firms, about $1,000 extra are in the pockets of participants as a result of this intervention. However, they obviously have to give up, and we are measuring this, a little bit in terms of transfer payments on EI. They're relying on EI and welfare a little bit less frequently, and they obviously have to pay tax on the earnings gains that they have. The only cost that they are bearing in this model is actually, this is something they're doing by choice. This is, and we learned this through some of the surveys, is they're spending some time, about 10% of the time that they did spend in the workplace, on their own actually doing. So we wanted to represent this as a cost. So we basically monetize their leisure activities. So that's what this cost is. But obviously when you have such a small cost under this kind of a model where firms and governments bear the full cost, the returns are massive, basically 2,000%. They're getting a massive return on investment only because their costs are so low. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But in terms of firms, where are their costs and benefits coming from? They obviously have to pay for the increased earnings. They pay for most of them. Some other firms are picking up some, but the firms in the study pick up the large majority of the earnings gains that are resulting. They get the occupancy gains and the gains in ancillary food and beverage revenue that we talked about. They get staff efficiencies from productivity gains, and then there's the HR savings. But they also have to pay increased corporate taxes on these gains. So when you sum all of these up, along with in this intervention, it is only half of the release time, again, that they are actually bearing. They're not paying for any of the costs of this model. As a result of the actual delivery for instructors, government is bearing those costs in this actual implementation. So as a result, it's obvious that the average firm in this study would get a massive return on investment. But that's not really what's most interesting to us. I'm going to jump to another scenario in a second, which actually assumes that these costs are borne by the firms, and that's what we really want to know. We want to know if they did bear those costs, does these benefits offset it? But really quickly, what the government gets is, obviously in this implementation, they bear the delivery costs, they bear half the release time, They do get benefits in terms of the income taxes, the foregone EI, and then some corporate taxes. But when they're paying the full cost of delivery, it is a loss for them overall. There's a net cost to get these gains for firms and participants. Overall, there still is a net gain to society from this. So this is an investment that government may consider compared to other priorities. A more interesting question, though, is this one. And this is where firms bear the full cost of training. And this is what is really interesting, is that even when firms are assumed to bear the full cost of training, including the release time, there is a positive net benefit for them within 12 months. So this is a short-term measure. The gains may be even greater in the long, but over the short term, even after you consider these costs, they have approximately a 25% return on investment. A couple of other interesting scenarios that I'll just highlight before we talk about how these returns vary, which is an important discussion, is the job grant scenario. The federal job grant has been obviously getting quite a bit of coverage, and it looks like it is going forward. This is the scenario where government is basically bearing 2/3 the cost of delivery, 1/3 by the Fed, 1/3 by the province, only 1/3 by firms. When you look at this scenario, what's happening here is you're basically multiplying the base returns by somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 times. So given when they only pay for 1/3 of the cost of delivery and the release time, the returns are still massive for firms. They're in the neighborhood of 140% return on investment. However, government still bears a cost in this scenario. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. That cost that they're bearing is having a very significant benefit for society, and that's basically a decision that government needs to make. Is this cost, sufficient enough compared to other priorities that they have to generate these returns for firms, individuals, and society as a whole? But just to show you another interesting scenario is when you assume that there is a break-even point for government, where they pay the precise amount in terms of the benefits that they get so that there's no basic return for them. Even under this scenario, you get a very large return for firms. So under this scenario, what it works out to be is firms are actually bearing half of the delivery costs and half of the release time. That kind of a shared cost-sharing arrangement leads to doubling of their money, basically. And this is a really interesting result because it kind of suggests that, the jobs grant scenario is a very generous scenario which should encourage employers to make these investments at a net cost to government, given that even when governments break even, there's still a massive return for workers. Now, given time, I'm going to come back to this issue, and I'm going to highlight a couple, before we open it up for questions and talk. I do want to get through this really quickly. I see we're getting pretty close here. The important point and some of the real power coming out of this study is in this explanatory analysis. These returns that I just walked through are for the average firm. This is an important metric, and it definitely does establish the business case for these kinds of investments, but these returns vary. And this key question about under what conditions does it make sense to do this, and how can you maximize these returns, is what's vital to understand from this. And there's some very important lessons that are coming out of this. Now, I don't have time to do this really justice where I can show you the contrasting results on some of these, but I'm going to allude to really quickly some of the really core determining factors. These are things, again, that are measured before training begins. These are things that are measured in an employee survey and through an organizational needs assessment. And what we're seeing is that the impacts vary by this context in very important ways. Some of these characteristics are participants at the time of enrollment, such as the size of the skills gaps. One of the key lessons with respect to this is very interesting, is that you need to target it where it's needed, because the larger the need, the larger the returns. It is not, in fact, those who are in the mid to upper level 2 range that drive ROI. It is, in fact, those on the lower end of the distribution, those in the upper level 1 and the low level 2. Both of these groups can get skill gains from essential skills training, but those who drive the returns are those who get performance improvement are those on the low ends of the distribution. And the reason this is important is because those in upper level 2, they get performance gains over time without training. They don't necessarily need essential skills training to improve their performance. They may get there anyway through technical skills training. However, those on the lower end of the distribution, they don't get there without essential skills training. That's why the ROI for them is larger. So I think this notion of focusing on those only in the mid to upper level 2 range is a misguided approach, and it won't drive higher ROI. Some other interesting ones relate to the level of motivation. So there's various ways that you can look at motivation at the outset of an intervention through an organizational needs assessment that will help you dictate, or help determine rather, how much engagement they're going to have in the learning activities. And the more engagement they're going to have, the better returns you're going to get. This was a really interesting one around trust. Anything that can influence levels of trust, such as if there was just a mass layoff, or there's some issues between union and management, anything that can cause individuals to lack trust in that workplace environment in particular will compromise performance gains. You can still get the skill gains, but to get the performance gains that drive ROI, it won't happen in firms where there's low levels of trust. In terms of social capital, this was another important one. This provides more opportunities for learning growth and just to propagate those skill gains. The more social capital you have, those are more contacts, more networks. So those who are at the very low end of that distribution in terms of contacts may have a harder time generating those gains. Really quickly, a couple of the things at the firm characteristic. This is a really vital finding here in terms of the breadth of business need. Although it's common sense on the one hand, it's very important to stress. The greater the need, the greater the return. Oftentimes, essential skills training and other forms of training are kind of seen as a reward. You go do training, you give it to individuals who may not even need it at the end of the day. You might get 2 or 3 people who need it, 2 or 3 people who don't. That is not going to lead to positive returns. Those firms at the outset of an organizational needs assessment who didn't have a breadth of business need, they only had 1 or 2 business needs, and they didn't articulate a very tangible business need, they don't generate performance gains. You can get skill gains, but they do not transfer to the workplace. They only transfer for firms that have very large performance or very large breadth of business need. Those firms that have this learning culture, this training readiness, and in particular this understanding of the link between skills and performance, and they have a plan to support that transfers. And that could be as simple as a plan for supervisors to engage in that training and to provide feedback to participants and to help them utilize that training. These are things that you can look at in an organizational needs assessment, and they'll give you an indication of where returns are likely. The implementation process is obviously important, and one of the critical things that I think many people know, but that this study has confirmed, that returns are higher when you effectively match that training with business needs. So not having it devoid of occupational and business relevance. When you align it to what they're looking for, the returns are larger. And obviously, the more training that you can do to a point, the higher those gains will be. Now, I just want to go back quickly to this before we open it up to questions about what these critical implications of some of what I just talked about are. So I think overall, this return on investment study has achieved the key goal of this study, and the key objective is to provide that compelling business case that workplace essential skills training does produce a positive return on investment, and I think this can support future government policies, industry initiatives, anything that aims to encourage employer investments in this kind of training. This study will help to bolster that. However, the critical thing that is coming out of this isn't just that number showing the return. It is stressing the vital importance of the ONA in not only designing an effective training solution, but in effectively reducing the uncertainty that employers have. So it's not enough to show them, okay, you can get an average return of 25%. They need to understand in their context, are they going to get that? Are they likely to get that? And that's what the ONA is for. It's not just a learning exercise for the instructor. It is an education exercise for both instructor and employer, where you come to a mutual understanding of what the situation looks like, what the needs are, what the conditions are, whether you can get those returns. And by educating the employer about what those returns could be for that context, that's where they're going to be willing to make those investments. So the assessment is a vital part of that process, and it should not just be viewed as some first step in customizing a curriculum. It's the first step in convincing an employer to do this, and then customizing a good curriculum.
It was amazing to witness in the field that some of you would expect the larger hotels or some of the more corporate branded hotels to have advantages over maybe some of the smaller markets, when really the culture, the learning culture, the trust, and the relationships with leadership really affected the capacity on whether people could get through the project. We had one hotel that had a kitchen burned down. They had turnover in the general manager position, managed to successfully get 50 employees through the training program. And then we had some other properties companies who struggle to get 7 or 8 employees through the program over a 6-month period. And it all came down to what was going on in the organizational culture. So if the O&A can help identify that up front, we're off to the races when it comes to delivery in the future.
Yeah, and the key thing to help to really think about, and I think it's another thing that is coming out of the study in terms of next steps for the field as a whole and for research, is what do you do with those results, and what else can you provide to maximize those conditions. So for instance, if you actually learn that there are trust-related issues, or the need doesn't appear to be as high, it's focused in a single area, or there's some of these other conditions like Adam's alluding to, the market conditions are such that just it's not a good time to do this because they can't dedicate, they don't have a plan to actually use this because there's just too much going on, then you know what? The correct answer in that kind of circumstances is sometimes don't do the training through this kind of a model at this point in time. The answer is, what else can we do to help that firm before you do essential skills training to get there? That may well be waiting for a better time to do it. Come back in 3 months. It may well be preparing a transfer plan where you help supervisors and management understand what they want to get out of this better, not just a one-off assessment, but working with them to understand what they need, how they would utilize this training. It may well be putting something in place with the employer to help build that trust, or come back when it's more suitable. Those are the things to think about, what to actually do with that assessment, not just to run through the motions and then go and do the essential skills training anyway. So why don't I just wrap it up quickly, and then we'll open it up for quick questions. These conclusions, besides the implications that we just ran to, are just a quick summary of the key impacts. So does workplace essential skills training improve worker outcomes? I think yes, we've shown definitively it does. There's large sustainable gains in both skills and job performance. We've increased job retention, employment rates, earnings. And this last bullet I didn't talk about at all, in fact, due to time constraints, but there is significant improvements in psychological and social capital that do help to reinforce these skill gains and overall broader well-being improvements for participants. Does workplace LES training improve firm outcomes? Yes, there were large gains in most of the business area of interest. We saw this in improved customer relations, leading to increased revenue. We saw it in terms of productivity, leading to reduced labor costs, and reductions in hiring costs associated with job retention. Similarly, some non-financial benefits in terms of worker morale and motivation that we didn't really talk about. Does this generate a positive ROI? Yes. Overall, on average, it's about a 25% return on investment. With funding under the proposed federal job grant, it's nearly 5 times that amount. However, this is an important point, that impacts and returns do vary based on context, and I talked about some of what those conditions are, but you can basically boil it down to depth of need, both of business needs of the firms, the depth of needs of the worker, the readiness of both the firm to do that training, and the receptivity of learners. And there's various elements to need, readiness, and receptivity that can be measured going into an intervention that can guide both instructors and employers in making the decision whether to proceed and how to proceed. That's it. Let's open it up.
Okay, so we have quite a few questions here, so I'm going to try to have you guys get through them as quickly as possible just because we are over time. Right in. So what percentage of staff received training in each firm? Were all identified staff trained, or was the employer limited to a certain number of employees being able to receive the training?
Great question. So there was no overt cap put on these numbers. There was a min put on the numbers often. We obviously didn't want to do this if we couldn't get 5 or 6 employees. In a couple of firms, we did go down that low, but there was no cap that we imposed because we assumed, well, at the time we definitely needed the numbers. So you recall, Adam, I think you got the largest ones in the neighborhood of 50 to 60. But in terms of the percentage of workers within the firms, it varies dramatically based on the size of the firm, and that is obviously a factor that does affect the likelihood that they are going to get gains. So the higher percentage of the staff that you're putting into the intervention, the larger the returns. On average, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of, on a low end, you might have 10%, and you might have upwards of 25% of staff in smaller firms.
Mm-hmm. What percentage percentage of the learners are immigrants or Aboriginal, and was this accounted for in the results experienced?
Yeah, so in terms of Aboriginal, it was a very low percentage. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. It's a very low percentage, such that we couldn't actually even do subgroup analysis on there. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8% of the sample. However, the immigrant sample was very large. It was about 42%. Another striking result that we do emphasize in the report with respect to this subgroup analysis is, though there are very interesting factors that I've just gone through where the results vary, the demographic characteristics of the workers isn't really one of them. So there is a degree of homogeneity in these results, in that immigrants, recent immigrants, Canadian-born, are getting these gains, quite uniformly.
And how many hours of training per employee?
So again, it varied. It was anywhere from 10 to 40 hours. That's what the offer, in fact, was. Again, this is another lesson coming out of the implementation. It is really hard to do essential skills training in a workplace context, certainly to get upwards of 40 hours. The average training was approximately 20 hours, half of what they were offered. And this was not because of the participants. So participants, there's a very high rate of take-up of what was offered. It's basically the release time, the constraints that employers face in the work demands in the workplace. They don't offer the full release time that was available.
There were some elements of the customized curriculum that were self-study, where individuals would set aside time and we'd negotiate it with the supervisors, and they would study various exercises and lessons independently. That was very difficult to see the uptake on that, and probably limited total training hours.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for raising that. It is a very important distinction. I mean, so the model did allow for, somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 contact hours, but there was a significant amount more that was available in terms of the release time that we would have paid for them to engage in the self-directed activity, but it was something that very few firms took up. I think, well, about a third of the firms took it up, but they only gave on average between 1 and 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do the LES facilitators need special certifications to do this work, and/or special knowledge of courseware development tools such as Captivate and Storyline?
So we worked with our partners at the beginning of this study to come up with a process by which we would recruit instructors. In many cases, we left it up to our partners. So in Ontario, Adam's organization handled the large majority of this training, either in-house or through their contractors. In other provinces, this was a great thing about the actual results, and us being able to look at industry trainers versus traditional community-based trainers, versus, in Nova Scotia, it's government. In Manitoba, it's Workplace Education Manitoba was doing it. So we had a various range of fields where they came from, but in fact, the skills requirements themselves were very broad. It was basically they needed at least 2 years of essential skills or foundational skills training experience and some industry-relevant experience. So we did.
Sorry, go ahead.
We actually partnered with Confederation College as well for some of the delivery in Thunder Bay.
So I just have two last quick questions here, and then we're going to wrap it up. So is the curriculum used in the project available?
Yes, it will be. It's undergoing the final edits now. It has been turned over to a few organizations that have requested it because they had an imminent thing. So if you actually need it, get in touch with us. This was something that was really important when we came into the study, and we had worked out with OLIS that it would be a publicly available curriculum that is not being commercialized, that it will be available to whoever wants it. We're kind of like the custodians on behalf of the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills for it, so if you need it, just contact me and we'll make sure that you get it. It will eventually be available on our website so that you won't have to go through that process, but if you have an an imminent need to use it, drop me an email and I'll make sure you can get it.
OTEC can also provide curriculum orientations and even train the trainer models for any of the resulting curriculum.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to get to one last question here. I can't get to all the questions today. We're quite a bit over time, but I'm pretty sure that if you have any follow-up questions that either David or Adam would be more than happy to to answer
Absolutely.
them and send them an email. So 20 hours of training was over what period of time?
It varied quite a bit. In some cases, it was what we used to refer to as a blitz model, so it was done over a 2-week period. But in most cases, it was spread out over a 4 to 6 week period. In some cases, it was longer, so there was more breaks. So it could be as long as 3 months. But in most cases, it was usually 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're going to end here. Like I said, we are a bit over time, but I just want to thank you both, David and Adam, for hosting this webinar for us. I think it's been really insightful and definitely lots of questions and interest in it. Again, to everybody, I apologize for the technical difficulties we experienced at the beginning. It definitely feels like a Tuesday after the long weekend, but anyways, just thank you very much, guys, for coming in, and thank you to everybody who participated today.
You're very welcome, and again, if there are any questions, you can pop me an email. My contact information isn't there, but it's basically dgyarmati, D-G-Y-A-R-M-A-T-I at srdc.org. srdc.org is our website. You can get my contact information off there. The report should be out within the next couple of weeks, so you can get the full details here.
And what I'll do is I'll send a follow-up email to all the attendees with both of your contact information, if that's okay.
Great.
Well, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.